when you first start learning to play the piano, there is a huge amount of information for your brain to take in. The learning your finger numbers, learning the names of the white keys, understanding what the black keys are, getting your fingers to coordinate, and also then musical notation and learning how the stave works and all the rest of it. But there's another side of it which is just as important and sometimes gets left behind, because it's it's the slightly less tangible stuff, but it's really important to get right from the beginning to set you up for a happy life playing the piano, free from injury, development of tension, tendinitis and all the rest of it, and also to get the best sounds you can out of your instrument. So what I'm referring to here is called piano technique, and it's purely how you use your fingers, your hands, your arms, forearms up to your shoulder muscles, even your back, when you want to make really big sounds, the whole of your body, to create the sounds that you want to make. Now, to some extent, if you're just playing on a keyboard, something that doesn't have any weighting to the keys, you will be limited in the sounds that you can get from that kind of instrument. However, piano technique is still important, because at some point, if you're learning to play the piano and all you have is a keyboard at this point, at some point in the future you will probably be able to get hold of a digital piano, or even better yet, an acoustic, because that's the aim. Or you can play on a street piano, which they're always acoustic, so that's good. So today I'd like to talk about an element of piano technique called fast repeated notes. Now I'm going to be using a couple of video clips I made of one of my students, Sophie, who is just progressing brilliantly through her Piano Safari method book. She practices pretty much, almost every day, and she comes back every week and she's making brilliant progress, and she listens to everything that I'm asking her to do, and has very good control of her body and her hands, and gets the right sounds out of the piano. So I've got a couple of clips of her to demonstrate some of these things today. So, fast repeated notes. This is the Piano Safari Level 1 for the older beginner, and this is Piano Safari Level 1 for the younger beginner. Now, in the younger beginner one, this bit of technique is called kangaroo, and that is purely because the rhythm that they are using to practice this bit of technique is the same rhythm as the word kangaroo, which is quaver, quaver, crotchet, kangaroo. Okay, so there's a couple of different bits that students have to do when they try this bit of technique. Well, there's lots of things going on at the same time actually, which makes it a little bit challenging. You need to have loose, floppy wrists, which is harder than it sounds when you're at the piano, because what people tend to do is they get their they get their fingers on their keys and they stay there, because they don't want to lose those keys. They don't want to drift from their notes and then not know where they are. So you get, people tend to sort of build up a bit of tension in their wrists. But with all the technique elements in the Piano Safari series, there's a big focus on this kind of movement. So loose floppy wrists, arm bounces and stuff like that. In order to get a consistently clear and precise tone from the note, you need a combination of things happening at once. So the end finger joint on each of your fingers, this is the finger joint that needs to be firm. So in very young children, this finger joint bends very easily. They have like noodle fingers, so it's much harder to push the keys down. But that bit of sort of hypermobility goes away quite quickly. And so you need your firm finger joints, you need a loose wrist, and you also need to be able to relax the rest of your non-playing fingers so that you don't end up sort of with all this extra tension in your hand. Actually, just doing that, I've got like a pain that just went across the top of my hand. Case in point, a brilliant reason for having good piano technique so you don't injure yourself. Okay, so it may seem obvious, but when you press a piano key, you have to wait. When you let go, you have to wait for that key to return before you can press it again. Okay? And when you try and play fast notes, that's when it can become a problem if you don't fully let go and let the key return. And often you find this with beginners, and they try and do fast notes, you know, when they're just messing around, and they'll do this. And they're not fully letting the key return, so some of those didn't sound. And actually what happened was I could feel already in my forearm there was a lot of tension where I was sort of trying to hold this kind of shape, and actually I was using loads of energy to no avail. I wasn't getting independent notes, I wasn't getting fast notes, they weren't clear, they were mushed together. So in order to let the key return as quickly as possible, you need this release of the key and to actually bounce off the key. So I'm not staying here, I'm coming off the key, which means it can come back as quickly as possible. And in order to come off the key, I'm not keeping all of this still, my forearm and my elbow and sort of that. I'm not keeping all of this fixed, I'm bending from the elbow. And that's the key, that's the move you need. Now that's exaggerated, but just to make the point, moving from here, from this hinge, means you're not relying on your fingers to do all the work of getting themselves out of the way. You're using your bigger muscle group in your forearm to do that for you, which it can do lots and lots of times without getting tired. If you relied on your fingers to do that, you would end up with a lot of tension and fatigue in your fingers. So that's how this little bit of technique works. So now I'll show you the clip of Sophie playing the kangaroo technique with these fast repeated notes, and the things that I'd like you to look out for in this clip are how her hand comes up from the wrist and she sort of propels herself off the keys on the third note of each one. So you get a high bounce on each one and you land back where you started. So this hand placement is a really important part of the technique, which relates to all areas of playing. When you're playing music, you won't stay in a fixed position like you do in the very beginning stages. So being able to land exactly where you intended, either where you came from or where you're going to in a piece of music, is quite a good skill to develop as well. So here is Sophie giving a brilliant demonstration of the kangaroo technique. Ready? Fantastic. Okay, so one of the things I really love about the Piano Safari series is the way they incorporate each new bit of technique in the book, which isn't just the technique in isolation, which can be a bit boring to play. They then have created an improvisation piece using that bit of technique, and also sometimes a rote piece as well, which is a piece learnt by pattern, so that you're not reading notes at the same time as trying to concentrate on technique, which I think is a really clever thing, because, I mean, learning to read music is tricky enough in itself, and often technique takes a back seat because what your student hears is the notes that they're playing rather than what you hear as a teacher, the tone of the sound that they're making. So I think this is a brilliant element of the Piano Safari series. So for the kangaroo technique, we've got the rote piece is great. I'm not going to show you that one today, but it's a lovely little one. But I've got a clip of Sophie and I playing the Kangaroo Takes a Trip improvisation piece, which requires her to, well, actually I can show you. We've got all these grey boxes along here, and in this row she was able to pick any of fingers 1, 3 or 5 and write them in all of these boxes. And then in the second row, up these 4 blank ones here, she could write finger 2 or finger 4. And keeping her hand in a fixed position with 3 on the F up here, it creates a brilliant bit of improvisation when combined with the teacher accompaniment, which you'll see in a minute. So on each of those finger numbers, she needs to do the kangaroo rhythm on that particular note, still implementing the same relaxed wrist, relaxed non-playing fingers, firm finger joint of the playing finger, and high bounce on the third note of the kangaroo, the crotchet of the kangaroo, and then landing in time to play the next one. So there's so many things going on at the same time with this bit of technique, but it works really well once you've got the hang of it. It works really well, and this little bit of improvisation is quite a fun one to listen to. So here's the clip. 1, 2, 3, go. Good, well done. So I hope you've learnt something new today, or if you already knew this, I hope it reinforced it. And even better, if you're currently learning from the Piano Soiree series or trying to play fast repeated notes yourself, I hope this has given you some tips in how to get a more consistent and precise sound that doesn't develop tension in your hand and lets you play with freedom without fatigue in your fingers.